Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to the Mastering Lychee 3D Support class tutorial video. In this tutorial, I hope to explain a bit more of my workflow and methodology behind how I go about supporting a fine and delicate part or object. This particular part is from a listing from Exclusive 3D Print and is the Portal Woman, and it's the Portal Gun part for those that aren't familiar with Portal. This is an intricate piece. It has some tiny little tips there on the very ends, and it has some little wires that are kind of just hanging out. And those alone make this an extremely delicate and difficult challenge. This part presented a lot of challenges and even took me about 4 test prints before I got a perfect print. Either had issues removing supports from the pointy bits at the end, or just did not survive. I actually had 2 partial fails. So it just goes to show you, no matter how much support work we do and how good we think we are, we will always learn something from a new part. Regardless, taking this on is still dealing with orientation first. And as we can see by the examples, you could have a fully supported one. You can also reorient it like we have that. I had 2 methods of orienting this part at first. One where the tips, the little feet or whatever you want to call them, were facing toward the bottom. Barely supported them, but they offered very little in self-supporting for the remainder of the print. So I considered this a bad idea after 2 failed support removals where a tiny bit of the cabling broke on one and surface areas. Cabling broke on one and the tip of the arm broke on another. The method with the tips facing down seemed good from the onset. Small surface areas, small start point, cable orientation, supported itself a decent amount in the middle, but it made it tricky and a bit hectic for support removal from the tip and cable areas anyway. So I decided to try an orientation with the tips of the little parts where they're sticking upwards towards the end of the print instead of down towards the beginning of the print. I had to add another drain hole, but that's easy enough to do, and then just work with the model from there. From here, we can start to take a look at the model itself and see the challenges it presents, whether it's the portal gun or something like this, an intricate mini. We need to think in the same way. First, preserve details. Second, good print. Third, easy removal. The one thing you don't want to do is spend 30-40 minutes removing print supports from every single print that you make. You're just going to get tired of doing it, and it's going to get annoying. You're going to get so annoyed and not look forward to pulling a print off your build plate that you're almost going to not want to print anymore. It's something that you really have to overcome, and I think hand supporting, manual supporting is really going to get you to that point where you feel like, all right, cool, I can do this. I'm going to remove these supports. It's going to be easy, snap, and done. And for the most part, most of the stuff I do support, I'm able to do that. Now, there are occasionally parts that we do, like this one, where you don't want to do that because you might break something just for the general sake of how it is designed. But you could probably get away with squeezing some of the supports loose and then just using a clipper just to use the stuff that's going to be really close to the small and intricate parts like the cables, things like that. And the reason I kind of left the camera just kind of looking at this part is as we're talking about it, I kind of wanted to have this as a point of reference because this cable that we're looking at is just one of, I think, 3 cables on this particular item that are literally a nightmare. They start as partial islands. They move up and become other islands and archway islands that connect to other islands. So they present a lot of challenges. They are one of the most tricky parts of this particular piece, and they're so small, they're so thin, and they're very fragile when they come out, so you have to be careful not to break them. The only thing smaller on this is the portal gun tips themselves, where you see those little bits that are kind of sticking out in the front and the back of each one of those little arms that come out from the front of the gun. I believe that's the front of the gun. Again, I'm not super familiar with the game, but I do know I've seen a lot of art from it, so this particular piece was funny. Again, those little bits on the front are another example of some very fine points that you need to support lightly enough in order to not destroy it when you simply remove your support, which is a common issue that you'll find when you have too heavy of a support in too light of a part of the object, and then you go to either cut or clip or remove it, and it simply just breaks that piece because it is stronger than that piece. Okay, so as we kind of take a look, one of the things you do obviously want to adjust is go ahead and take your resolution or your layer height down to maximum. I was actually told you can crank it up to 20, but I use 35 just for this demonstration because it's what I personally still use, and then I go slice by slice anyway. So regardless of how we do the island search, I'm still going to go over that part in detail as well. This is a long one, so go get a drink and some snacks. We, of course, are going to dive right in. If you need commands, remember, folks, they're always at the bottom unless you turn off the tips. Alt plus Control will give you the mini supports. Alt on its own will give you tree supports onto another support or onto the model itself. We're going to cover the areas with 3 custom types of supports. These are all light, but they will vary in bar and tip diameter, ranging from 1.00 to 1.05 in the tip. In the bar, and the tip diameter will range anywhere from a 0.15 all the way to a 0.10. And again, that varies depending on what area of the model, how small the detail is, and how little pressure I want to apply when I go to remove the support. But also keeping in mind, I still want the parts of the model to survive, so you do have to vary this and combine it with other types of supporting or cluster them together in order to maintain a level of balance in the area that you're supporting very lightly. So we're also going to use minis, of course, and the minis will look very small, like hairs in some cases, especially in the 0.10 size. And the tip lengths can range anywhere from 2.74 to a 3.25, as I usually use, with the 2.74 being the shorter tip length when the bar needs to get a little bit closer. Now, as you'll notice, I didn't really go over the whole island searching thing because, again, this is more of we're focusing on the way I'm doing supports, feature stuff like searching for islands and things like that. That video is that's not going to be covered in this video. We're really just trying to focus on the way the support workflow is, the way I handle the support workflow on an object like this, and how I will handle different supporting aspects of an object like this particular one. So if you're looking for other videos such as, searching for islands and things, we do have content on that. You should check out our channel. We have tons of videos and tons more coming every single week. Also, don't forget, if you have not, please join our Discord server. We have lots of discussions there about printing, 3D printing support, troubleshooting, Q&A, and all sorts of fun stuff. We've got a few members there already that have joined us from the channel, and a few more from our Instagram that have joined us as well, and we hope to see you there. I'll put the link in the description below for the invite so you can jump on board. Now that there I call a little mini cluster. That's a one light support in the center and then a bunch of mini supports surrounding it like a little tree. It is technically a type of tree, I guess, if you want to be honest, but it's mini supports with one bigger support underneath it. And that works really well because when you go to remove that, that's just going to kind of pop right off. The mini supports offer enough springiness to offer resistance for the part while it's being printed. But when you go to remove it with the support removal, they tend to be a little bit more forgiving. It makes it a little bit easier that way. Okay, so for a lot of the areas around the cables, you definitely want to make sure that you put enough supporting there, but not too much supporting. Like you want to put some bracings where you can. Like I'm going to move these supports apart a little bit by using the Advanced tab. Again, that's hitting spacebar. So when you do that, that's going to bring up the Advanced tab. Now, when you're in Advanced mode, you can't add supports. So if you ever get stuck in Lychee and you can't add any supports, it's probably because you hit the spacebar and you just didn't realize it. So hit the spacebar again and try it and see if you can add a support because they lock out the addition supports function when you're doing it. You can only manipulate support parts. Now, as you go around the ringed areas with the holes, you want to kind of ring around the hole as you kind of build your support ring to make sure that that hole builds well and make sure that the drain hole creates itself with a nice solid structure, because you don't want those drain holes, especially the ones at the beginning, to close up. And I'll go over that in a minute when we start supporting that area, because there's a lot of material towards the back, or the bottom here, that's going to be starting closest to the start, and it's a big enough surface area that I think we're going to be having a lot of support for the rest of the model from the initial part of the model. So if we support this well and this builds up well, then I think the rest of the model will build fairly well from this. And all we have to do is make sure that we maintain the island supporting the way it should be, and maintain the balance that we need for the rest of the supporting on the delicate parts. I'm going to go ahead and work our way through the rest of the islands here, and as we do, I'm not going to talk my way through every single island placement, as you guys have seen me do this in so many videos, and honestly, the focus here is how we're supporting each one, the type of support that we're using for each particular part, and how we're doing it based on location, island, and the different aspects of how far the part is away from the model, how much of it is kind of a dangling object versus something that's stemming from the object. The problem with the wires, and you'll see as I work on them, is that they don't build up on each other very well. Unless I were to turn the object completely on its end and just point everything straight up, and even then they kind of twist and turn and stuff like that. So they don't entirely build up on themselves really all that well. And orientation wise, even if you were to move things around, you wouldn't really find them supporting themselves very well, no matter what you tried to do. They're still going to island up plenty of times throughout their building process. This way, at least, I'm islanding them, and they're building arches, and arches have a lot of strength. So hopefully that means that they'll be able to pull back and, create a little bit more resistance for the peel forces that they're going to be feeling in the areas that have the most resistance against the FEP, which of course are the yellow zones. And we'll see all of that once we get those yellow areas to light up, when all the supporting has actually been finished on the island parts. As to not leave you guys in total silence, we can go ahead and chat a little bit while this is going on. Now, one of the things I want to reiterate as well is that when you are doing your initial island sweeps and you're doing your supporting on just your islanding areas, or you're doing just minor supporting and you're creating your initial framework, as I like to call it, keep in mind that you can plan ahead while you're doing this. And when I say that is, you kind of want to plan for the rest of what your support structure is going to look like. So like right there, where I have this kind of going through the other one, um, we don't necessarily think that's not necessarily a bad thing, is what I'm saying. That support, that little mini support going through the nose of the other one, will actually in general make it stronger, of course, because it's now pushing through another support. You can actually do that. That's actually a really cool way to add a little bit more strength to a mini support. You can run the mini support through another support. You can also run them through each other, creating mini bracings if you want. All right, once the yellow areas light up from the supports being finished, it will be easier to determine by eye where most of the heavier supporting work needs to be done. Take a moment every once in a while and review the state of the work as well that you've done. Rotate around the model, take a look at the supporting that's there, especially if you're doing this for someone else, like pre-supporting work or something like that. I do pre-support work for our clients professionally. I do work for folks on Fiverr. And let me tell you, even with work as good as I do tend to do it, I will sometimes get a failure. And they'll come back to me and say, "Oh, you failed it." I always work it through with them. Third time's a charm sometimes, second time's a charm sometimes. But it's always good to take a look at what you're doing, and it's good to see what the failure does when you get a failure, because you can always go back and say, "All right, this is what went wrong." Um, so again, it's always good to review, and I mean both while you're working on something and when it's finished, and whether it's successful or failed, or if it was partially successful or mostly successful. Maybe you had some detailed blurring or a pancake, slight pancake or something in some areas. Those things you can always kind of address and then reapply, reprint, that sort of thing, kind of give it another shot. So um, again, these are all things that you need to consider. The more you get into hand supporting, and the more you get into hand supporting very intricate items, especially some of these ones that they don't come with pre-supports. So you're going to have to figure this out. And auto supporting is not going to work really well for an item like this. Auto supporting won't be terrible on everything that you try to use it on, because it will work. But when it comes to intricate or delicate, we definitely don't want to use auto support. It's not going to work the way that you need it to make sure you get a good print, good details, and preserve that quality with the easy support removal that you want. It's not going to be. Well, I mean, you might get lucky on some objects, but not on something like this. Now, where you have little tiny arms and stuff, the auto support's not going to take into consideration how small that part is. It's just going to stick a support on it where it thinks it needs to be, and it's going to over support some areas, and that's going to make it more complicated there. So keep that in mind. That's a very big, very, very big part of it. Let's go ahead and finish up on the inside, and then we'll get back on the outside so we can finish the support work. The rest of the model should be good internally. Like I said, you really want to keep the internal support to a minimum. The reason I say this is internal support work needs to be removed, really, for the most part. You don't want breakage from the inside out, where the supports will eventually get tight because the model starts to squeeze down on them. You want them to be brittle to the point where either they're going to break first, or you can get a tool in there and remove them. In this case, I'm going to use the front of the portal gun and shove a small metal tool in there and just kind of get them out. If you saw what I'm doing here, I'm creating a little fin that's actually leaning on the model itself. And that tip there is leaning back on the model, and then that's actually kind of creating a little support there between the two, the top and the bottom. And then I'm treeing up a bunch of supports there from the middle of that support. And that will actually do really well because it's building up at a good angle with the rest of the piece, and it's going to be right underneath that arm connected to the model itself, and really, really sturdy part of the model where there's a nice thick wall underneath it. So that should be a really good way to adequately support that. And that's going to be super easy to remove. You'll just be able to go in there with a clipper and just clip, 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 and pop that right out. And it looks a little funky, but I think it'll work pretty well, to be honest. Believe it or not, we're actually almost through supporting this one entirely, so let's try and wrap up when we need to. So let's remember, the goal is obviously 1, easy removal, 2, good print, preserve details, number 3. This should be like a mantra for you. To be really honest, this comes fairly naturally to me now, so when I look at the models, I pretty much always have a good idea of where to go. Now, of course, Lychee helps with that, and a lot of slicers do indicate that what we call hot zones or pressure zones, and they indicate areas that we will see the most resistance or peel force against the FEP when they print. This why pretty much every slicer shows these hot zones is because you want to make sure that either you angle your material at such a way that it's not at this angle where it's going to be at about a 40-45 degree angle, or above. I mean, I guess you want to angle it above that, where it's not going to be so much pressure. But sometimes it just makes sense to angle things at a particular angle, even if it does create a hot zone. You just add it, you add the support there rather than adding the support somewhere else. Because the thing is you could have supported this like a hot dog, straight up and down, putting all the supports at the bottom, not supporting really much as you go up, and only kind of supporting the tips and the bottoms of the cables. That might have worked. I haven't tested it like that. These are the methods that I've tested on it. This is what I know will actually work because I got a successful print with good details and all the supports came off and nothing broke. So again, it's test, and then kind of try what works. You do a couple of different supporting methods for the same object, and then you kind of do them all at the same time, and then you take a look and you go, okay, this one worked, this one didn't, this one partially worked, and then you kind of work out why each one had its issues. And then, of course, if you had a partial success and you want to see improvement, that will help you kind of improve on that. And you'll go, okay, why did this partially fail? All right, there wasn't enough supporting here, so I had a pancaking issue. It pulled away from the rest of the support bed, which caused the support failures from the rest of the print. Boom. Now you can work your way around that. There we go. So for the bottom of the portal gun, the way I laid it out is I have a bunch of, essentially I'm using my regular light supports to create a main framework, and then I'm going to go around those kind of in a more balanced pattern, creating kind of smaller supports around it. And I really want to focus in the kind of the Twinkie shaped area there at the bottom and the yellow areas at the top. That kind of looks like it's like a mushroom shape there. So essentially, I want to cover those silhouettes, and I want to make sure that they have enough supports to cover the hot zones or the yellow areas. And I've gone over this in other videos that I've talked to with you guys, and I mentioned the yellows. Don't forget the yellow zones. Focus on the yellow zones. I really can't stress that enough when it comes to delicate stuff, because this is where your print is going to be supported. The light stuff around the edges, where all the little tiny stuff is, that's not supporting much. So regardless of how much you're putting there, all that's going to do is make it harder to remove without damaging it. So this area, the bigger area that you have, whatever wide areas that you have, whatever flatter areas, whatever bigger zones you have, that's where you want to focus your supports. This is exactly why I didn't face this straight up and down like a skyscraper, was because I didn't want to lose the ability of having this giant surface area at the bottom where I was going to be able to place a ton of supports, which was going to help this model part print out successfully. And we'll go ahead and finish up our workflow here just by adding more supports to the bottom or wherever we need to, possibly a couple along the sides. We'll do a final review on some of the slicing here. We'll take a look at the layer by layer as we kind of build up to make sure that we did a good job where we needed to as we built up the layers. In the bottom here where we built our little ring of supports, we can see that does a really good job of grabbing a hold of those initial layers. Our little tree support there does a really great job of grabbing a hold of those initial pieces there in that initial layer. But we can see maybe we've neglected some stuff here. There's some gapping in the middle. Maybe we can add a little bit more to kind of compensate for some of this additional surface area that's going to be printing for each one of these additional layers. Now this is going to come up in layers, obviously, as it does, but I think one of the important things to note is that you want to have the best coverage possible. And by going layer by layer, when you look at it like this, and this is the ultimate way to catch your mistakes or catch anything where you may have neglected an area, is by going up layer by layer, looking at it from one angle, seeing how it's printing, then turning it upside down and looking at it from essentially from the perspective of what the build plate is seeing versus what the screen is looking at. And I think that that's an interesting way to look at it. You're looking at it from both angles. It'll give you an idea of what is coming, what's coming next, and how those layers are going to build on each other, how disconnected your islands are, how long they're disconnected for, how long until the islands become part of the actual model. There's a lot of cases in this particular object where the islands stay islands for quite some time, and that can become a challenge issue. So this is why we talked about the different types of delicate supports, how to use mini clusters, setting up trees. This is all part of the advanced system that Lychee and other supporting programs use like this to allow you to support delicate parts. Most people load up a model, hit the auto support button and go. If you're savvy, you might use the island search. You might know hollowing, things like that. But if you're not really savvy, then you're not going to be able to sit here and kind of like go layer by layer, slice by slice, look at this one little piece at a time. A lot of people just don't have the patience for it. But in all honesty, if you want a really great print, you should take the 20 minutes that it's going to take for you to go slice by slice and look at your print. Because you're simulating what the screen and the build plate are going to be doing by going slice by slice. You can take a look really closely at how different supports are going to form. You can take really closely and see where pixels are going to form and where the support is going to catch them. Let's say it's not directly in the center. Great. Now you can use the advanced tool and you can move that support a little bit so it's maybe a little bit closer to the center. Things like that. Fine adjustment, fine tuning can only be done if we look at it through a very fine lens. And I think that doing this, using the layer slider and going up and down and going, through each layer as you go, I think is the only real way to truly know that you have actually done a good job at supporting the object. And at that point, you can say, okay, I have checked every aspect of this. I've looked at this layer by layer. It is supported great. There's no problems here. Now, don't get me wrong. The trick, like I discussed in my video last week about the finding more islands using the Lychee trick that I showed you, and it's not necessarily a trick. It's just if you're always working in 50 microns, you're not going to know that by scanning at 35 or 20 or 45 or 40 are going to get you a different number of islands. You wouldn't know this because you've never experimented with that. Now, that video is simply to demonstrate the fact that this is a thing, it does exist. You can use it to help you find more islands that you may not have found. Because Lychee, as I've been told, uses a system that not only islands based detection on the actual surface area, but I believe it's based on the pixels themselves. So the program is actually trying to see where those pixels are going to form on the screen and help, I guess, best form where the best island catch is going to be and where that support should be to catch it. So now I believe what happens is the thinner you make your layer height, the higher your resolution, so be it. Let's say you bring it down to like 10 microns or something. The slices are going to be super thin. Therefore, the pixels that it's going to catch as islands are going to be much smaller. And I think it allows you to catch more islands in that sense. They won't necessarily be an island at 50 microns because they may actually be part of another chunk that starts with something else. But because you're now taking it from 50 to 10 or 20 or what have you, you have this difference in slice height. And that will make a huge difference on where the islands are actually forming, or how they're forming, rather. So I think that the thing is, it is kind of a trick. It's not really a trick. It's essentially layer height determines how the islands form in general. So using this as a method of kind of helping you detect where additional islands might be is actually kind of smart, because you can see at a higher layer, or a thinner layer height rather, or increased resolution or layer resolution, you are going to find that the islands will increase, especially on a highly detailed object. And so I think that's why the trick works, to help you kind of identify more islands. It's also something to keep in mind that if someone works at a particular layer height, does pre-supporting work, and then you get the file, you must always check that file at whatever layer height that you're working at, because even going backwards and forwards, I have sometimes found that going from 35 back to 50 will find like an additional 1 or 2 islands. And again, it's because this is how the system uses the island checker to check for the pixels where they would form the islands as the screen would see them. So this is the reason why this trick kind of works, so to speak, is because it's emulating that kind of process. And so it's good to do this because it's a nice check that you can use, you can actually have the software do for you. But as I just said before, it is imperative that you go layer by layer to make sure that you apply the supports where they need to be. You apply them to the lacking areas. You make sure that they're in the zones where they absolutely need to be applied. Make sure the hot zones don't get ignored. Cover all the yellow spots. I don't mean literally cover them like they don't have to be doused in supports, but as long as there's enough there to make sure that it's balanced, and to make sure that your tree supports have mini supports on the tips to support them a little bit, to make sure that the tree trunk doesn't break away from the branches, which can happen if you put too much strain on the trunk of a tree series of supports. Like you can have a light tree trunk, but then you can have two sublights that come out of it. And if that's maybe a little bit too much pressure because of the area they're in, they'll pull away, or they'll cause that support to fail in general because they're just causing too much weight on a bar that can't handle it. Now on this particular piece, because these are delicate areas like the little thin arms or the little thin cables, I don't see them presenting too much resistance force against the support. What I worry about is these little bits and parts kind of losing themselves to the fact that they're just so small and delicate. Now, we'll just hope that, you know, the supporting method that we choose works out every time. But as I said in the beginning of this video, this particular object was a challenge for me and took me several test prints in order to get it to a really good working solid state. Now, I got it there. It finally looks great. Everything's great. You know, the piece we printed is actually going out to the customer. This was a customer part that we were trying to get done. And the portal gun actually presented such a very heavy challenge for me that I had to do a number of these to get it printed properly. So this was one of those kind of not fun ones, but it was actually one of the ideas. I actually gave me the idea for this particular episode, and since you guys all wanted to see some more masterclass style stuff for 3D supporting Lychee slicer, I figured this would be a great topic, is talking about something like this where you have these little dangly bits that are kind of hanging off, these little cables, these little tiny arms, and these are small. This is a small part. These are very small little tips. I can absolutely promise you those little tiny bits there at the front are smaller, almost as small or smaller than some of the support tips we're using here. Now, I mean, not the very tip of themselves, but it's pretty small. So anyway, that is it for this, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed this one, and I hope this was good. So what do you think? Did we do good? Did we cover enough? Let us know. Subscribe to the channel if you're not a member. Hit us up on Instagram, find us wherever we are, and don't forget to check us out on Discord. Of course, like I said, the invite link is going to be down in the description, and we'll see you all again soon. Enjoy some tunes along with the slice, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks again.